one thing I'm doing wrong, that I know I'm doing wrong, that I could fix, that I would fix. You meditate on that, you'll get an answer. And it won't be one you want, but it'll be the necessary one. When you're trapped, some of it's your own inadequacy. What you do is every bloody thing you can do in the most virtuous and powerful negotiating position possible. Wherever I go in the world, people come up to me and they often have a pretty rough story to relate. It's an awful thing because you see, even in the revelation of their triumph, the initial depth of their despair. So I wouldn't change that.
Sucker.
But it's not nothing.
Eat my what?
Certainly not just happiness.
Oh, eat my white cock, buddy. Hey, all right.
But it's almost unbearable.
Can you do me a favor if you're listening to this and hit the subscribe button, the follow button, wherever you're listening to this podcast? Thank you so much. The conversation you guys have been waiting for. I say that because thousands and thousands of messages I've had since I announced Jordan Peterson, the man himself, all the way from Canada, came here to sit in my kitchen and have a conversation with me. And what a conversation it was. One of the most moving moments in the history of this podcast takes place in this conversation. And I think the thing that people love about Jordan Peterson is his unrelenting desire to just say what he believes to be true. Not what people want to hear. Not what people will be happy. And it's because of his pursuit of truth that he's managed to change millions and millions and millions of people's lives. That is absolutely no understatement. So without further ado, I'm Stephen Bartlett, and this is the Diary of a CEO. I hope you're listening, but if you are, then please keep this to yourself. First, I feel like I owe you a debt of gratitude. I want to say thank you for the impact you've had on my life. I'll point at the specific impact you've had on my life. And you asked me before we started recording why this podcast had been successful. One of the reasons is actually something I've gained from reading and listening to your work, and that's this real commitment to trying to be your true self and trying to be your truth. This podcast wouldn't be successful, and I wouldn't have been successful in terms of pursuing myself had I not understood the importance of truth across all facets of life and in my relationships, which was a real pivotal thing for me. Mm-hmm. And that's thanks to your work.
So what's changed in your relationships as a consequence of that?
So I believe it's really difficult to truly connect with someone if you're not speaking and being your truth. And I wasn't. I think I was wearing a mask in my relationships in the context of I didn't express how I was thinking and feeling. I was trying to be who I thought my partner wanted me to be. And at the point I let down the mask and I started speaking my truth, actually, as I was departing from the relationship, the relationship got stronger than ever before. And it was like we were never actually connected until I was being true with her, with my feelings, with what I wanted, with my life. And since then, I would categorize my relationship as being the strongest thing I've ever seen in terms of a romantic.
And so when you were starting to talk about your relationship in a more truthful manner,
well, that's what you are.
What did that mean that you had to admit? I mean,
I thought you know that exactly.
The disconnect between who you were trying to be and who you really were. So that's a persona issue, right? So you think maybe, and everyone has this proclivity to some degree, is they're deeply self-conscious and uncertain. And so instead of allowing the person they're with to connect with that underlying uncertainty and inadequacy, they act out a persona.
Yeah.
And then the problem is that, well, perhaps the person falls in love with that persona, but there's no real connection there. It's an artifice. And, having said that, one of the things that Carl Jung, the great psychotherapist, said about a persona is, don't be thinking that you're better off if you never formed one. So for Jung, it was avoiding, say, undifferentiated self in infancy and so forth through the persona to authenticity, because you have to act out your ideals to some degree, right? And And you also have to formulate
Yeah,
a
Mexican.
avatar of yourself
Yeah.
in some sense that's a mediator between you and other people in casual social encounters. Like, you don't want to walk into the bank and have the teller tell you about his or her day when you say, how are you doing? Right? I mean, now and then that can happen, but generally it's too much intimacy too quickly. And so you need this functional shell. But the problem arises when that functional shell is all that there is. And then the real person underneath is just desperate and unhappy because nothing of what's being acted out reflects a true underlying reality.
What is the consequence, the long-term consequence of acting? So many people, especially because of the world I live in, and Instagram and social media, we kind of build out these personas, and then we almost follow the implicit instructions that come with those personas.
Well, that's the problem right there, is that, well, that I'm trying to get a hold of the Disney people at the moment because I want to do issues on Pinocchio, because I think Pinocchio is a brilliant work of art. And if you're a puppet and an actor, and Pinocchio is both at times in that movie, both a puppet and an actor. So why an actor? Like, why is there something wrong with being an actor? Well, the first question is, well, who sets your role? And then the second question is, who's pulling your strings? So you put on this front that is there to make you popular and sexy and desirable and to mask from yourself your own inadequacies. But that's a role. Well, who wrote it? And for what purpose? And so Jung said, for example, that we all acted out a myth, and whether we knew it or not. And maybe you're acting out a tragedy. Maybe you're acting out Narcissus. You don't know, because you've put that on yourself in an attempt in some ways to deliver to people what they want, or more accurately, to look as though you're delivering to people what they want. And it's not nothing to do that, right? Because at least you're attempting, in some sense, to adapt to the social world. Someone who's really infantile and dependent, someone who's never left home, part of their problem is that they haven't crafted a persona. So you don't want to denigrate it entirely, but it's no substitute for the real thing. And it turns out that not only is the real thing, but that's also the adventure of your life. And so if you aren't truthful, and that means, unfortunately, especially at the beginning when you start to be truthful, it means deeply coming to terms with your inadequacies in humility. So it's very painful. Without that, you don't have the adventure of your life. You have the role that you've acquiesced to. And that'll take all the meaning out of your life.
The adventure of your life. You say, imagine who you could be, and then aim single-mindedly at that.
Mm-hmm.
I encounter these young people who appear to know who they could be, or they've imagined who they could be, but for whatever reason they seem to choose the certain misery of their current situation, the job that's sucking their soul out, or that relationship, over the uncertainty they'll encounter as they go on the adventure of their life. So what would I say to these young people who always say to me, Steve, I want to do this, but you can see them stifled by fear, because it's like...
Yeah, well, it's like make a plan, man. So when I was doing my clinical work, which I did a lot of career work with my clients, both at a beginner level, so like really a beginner level, with people who had no employment whatsoever, no history of employment, who were undereducated and who lacked every skill you could possibly imagine. So these were people who were really in dire straits, up to people who were operating at the top of their profession, but who could still strategize forward. And so, for example, let's say you're at a dead end in your job. So I don't find my work meaningful. All right, so that's a problem statement. It's like, well, why not? I find the work I do repetitive and boring and without spirit. I have a bad relationship or a neutral relationship with my boss who doesn't know who I am. I have problems with coworkers. All of that needs to be differentiated, right, and analyzed in detail. So we might say, for example, let's say you believe that you're undervalued at work, and maybe you are. What you need to do is you have something to say, and we would have to figure out what it is that you have to say. But it would be some variant of, I'm bringing more value to the table than I'm being compensated for, and that's demoralizing me. And it's also not good for you being my boss, because if I'm actually more valuable than is being recognized, then the fact that you're not valuing me properly means that I will come to more.
I'm familiar with. Can you say ara ara?
So it's bad for both of us.
I can actually suck your big old black nut.
Not
Ah,
amenable to
dude,
such a
I have a
discussion,
friend for
then
that.
what you should
Hey,
seriously
lengthy
consider
nip.
doing is finding another job. Okay, so let's say we're going to set you up. Okay, this isn't like Get Leaks Enterprise, man. This is your
That's what I'm
life.
talking about, bro.
So
Yes,
the
sir.
first thing I would ask
Yes,
is, well,
sir. You guys suck
do you
ass.
have your resume or CV in order? Well, I haven't typed it up for 3 years. Well, what do you think about bringing it up? Well, I'm pretty nervous about that because there's some holes in it, and I didn't do so well in college, and I'm kind of embarrassed about my resume. It's like, okay, bring it in. Let's go through it. Let's at least update it. Let's look where the holes are. Let's look at where the inadequacies are as far as you're concerned. This isn't my judgment, it's your judgment. Let's walk through those judgments and see if they're warranted, because maybe you're just too guilty and ashamed and self-conscious and anxious, and you're looking at your resume more critically than someone else would, and maybe there's some holes that you need to rectify. You were 2 courses away from your BA and you dropped out, something like that. Well, maybe we need 6 months to address that. And at least, even if you can't be fully educated, you could be taking some courses online. And so when you went to a new job interview and they said, what about this hole? You'd say, well, I came to terms with that 6 months ago, and in an effort to rectify it, I'm taking the following courses, and here's my plan for completion. That's a really good answer. And anyone with any sense who's interviewing will accept that as an indication that
Boys are
although
all
you're
on the
not
other side.
perfect, and who is that you have a good plan and that you've thought it through. Like, that's the kind of answer that in all likelihood will cement your candidacy for the position. Okay, so now you're going to go
Oh, I
to
just
your
got
boss.
busted on.
Well, you have to have your CV and your resume in order, and you have to be able to stand on it solidly, and which at least means that you're prepared to address the inadequacies in a credible, realistic, believable, and truthful manner. All right, now what you do is apply for like 10 jobs. You don't have to take them, but maybe you have to go to an interview or 2 or 3 or 4, and maybe there's a bunch of opportunities out there for you that you didn't even know about. And maybe someone offers you a job.
Hey, yo, go hunt them.
So now you can go
Yeah. I'm about
Here's
to
the
bust.
situation I'm in here at work.
Ass.
Here's my evaluation of the problems in relationship to me. Here's what I could do for you if you gave me a 40% raise and the opportunity to progress, but I'd like to see a plan for that. And I've been looking for other opportunities before conducting this discussion, and I have some. Well, then, if your boss treats you with contempt at that point and doesn't listen, then perhaps he or she is a little more narcissistic than might be optimal, and it's time to find a new job. But this isn't something you do trivially. And so when you're doubtful, say you're trapped, you ask yourself, well, why am I trapped? And that's a hard question, right? Because some of it's your own inadequacy, a lot of it. And all of the part of it that you can deal with is your own inadequacy. So even if it's unfair, even if you're hemmed in for any number of reasons, inappropriate, like ethnically predicated oppression, let's say, or maybe you're in a workplace that really is sexist in some fundamental sense. Well, that's not good, it's not just, it's not fair, it's not meritorious, all of those things. And maybe you shouldn't be there. But what you can do to begin with is every bloody thing you can put yourself in the most virtuous and powerful negotiating position possible. And you have to think like a snake in some sense to do that. You got to get the details right. You have to be prepared to bite, and you have to have your eyes on the prize, so to speak. And people aren't taught this sort of thing ever, really. They're not taught how to negotiate. They're not taught how to goal set. They're not taught how to conceptualize appropriate success in some broad sense. In some sense, that's what the humanities are supposed to teach people. So,
on that point of understanding my inadequacies or someone's inadequacies, I really believe that it's really difficult to undergo self-development if you don't have self-awareness. And I was really trying to understand from your writings how someone is to build their self-awareness. It's almost like the unknown unknown. If you don't have it, how do you build the thing?
Oh, I know a good exercise for that. It's like a prayer in some sense. In fact, I would say it's proper prayer. If you want to know something about yourself, sit on your bed one night and say to yourself, you got to mean this. Like, you got to be desperate. This is no game, this. Like, my life is not everything I want it to be, and perhaps it's not everything that I need. I mean, my life is so unbearable that the suffering that's attendant upon this may be nihilistic, cynical, bitter, resentful, homicidal, genocidal, unable to have a good relationship, prone to punish people for their virtues because of my jealousy, driving the proclivity to see evil everywhere except within my own heart. Like, these are problems, man. And you ask yourself, you sit on the bed and say, okay, man, I'm ready to learn something. Like, what's one thing I'm doing wrong that I know I'm doing wrong, that I could fix, that I would fix? Like, you meditate on that, you'll get an answer. And it won't be one you want, but it'll be the necessary one. You know, and it's often something that will point you to small things. So Carl Jung said, people in the modern world don't see God because they don't look low enough. And so imagine you're in your messy bedroom, you know, and you're sitting on the edge of the bed trying to have an honest dialogue with yourself. And the little voice says,
Yeah,
"No,
he's
it's pretty
back there,
disgusting
dude.
here." And you think, well, I'm way above
Did you
such
just call me the
trivial
N-word?
niceties as organizing my room.
Just
Well,
get
that's
up and take a
pride.
dig, bro.
That's
Honestly,
arrogance.
bro, I'm not even talking to
If
your
you're
sexy
above-
ass. Shut the fuck up.
Organizing what's actually yours. How in the world are you ever going to organize anything else?
Yeah, that's
And so
what I
you get
thought.
on your knees
Stay
and you
quiet.
think, well, it's time to, you know,
Bro,
take
you
a
just
brush
want to keep
the
riding a
toilet.
nigga dick, huh? A nigga white
Maybe
cock.
that's
Bro,
where
bro,
you
no,
start.
on God, I
You
do,
just want
dog.
to like that,
Yeah,
huh?
yeah, for real. I bet it's
Start
fucking
making those
4
micro
centimeters.
improvements.
Shit,
Real
less than
micro
that.
improvements, real
Nah,
on the ground
4
actual
centimeters. If ain't
micro
4 centimeters, I don't
improvements
want
that
it.
you know that are wrong.
It might
You'll
be 4.
improve unbelievably
It might be 4. Maybe 2.
What
Maybe
you're talking
2.
about there
2?
sounds to me a lot like,
2. Yeah, that's kind. You know what? I can handle 2. No, we
dose
good.
of
We good.
arrogance and also the need for humility. Do you
Bet,
think
bet.
the Western world
Big bet.
suffers from arrogance because of our relative?
Watch the bomb. It's right outside the door. Oh, never mind.
We kind of overlook.
Of course, well, that's a temptation, right? I mean, when the left, radical lefty types
Those guys
go
are sewer
after
rat,
people
bruh.
for
What
their
the fuck?
underprivilege, they have a point. Now, the point is, the existentialists called it throne.
Fucking
It's
N-word.
That's a Heideggerian term.
What an N-word.
Thrownness is the fact that
N-word,
we kind
N-word,
of experience
N-word.
life as if we're tossed into it, thrown into it. You know, you're male and not female. You're Hindu and not Christian. You're tall and not short. You have an arbitrary range of talents and an arbitrary range of limitations, none of which, in some sense, you chose. It's the cards you're dealt. Now, some of those are cards of privilege. You know, maybe you're born intelligent. Maybe you're born symmetrical. Maybe you're born healthy. Maybe you're born into a culture where it's much easier not to be absolutely deprived. Maybe your parents are rich. And so all of that, in some sense, is unearned. Now, along with that comes a good dose of existential guilt. Because at the same time, and this is for anyone, regardless of their cultural background, the ground we walk on is soaked in the blood of historical atrocity. And so that's on you. Because, you know, people think, well, who's the Nazi? Well, it's the fascist, or it's the radical left-wing ideologue. And the fundamental truth of the matter is that's best dealt with as a spiritual matter. Is the adversary is within, really, most profoundly. And so you have to take the responsibility for that historical atrocity onto yourself. I was talking to Guy Ritchie this week about his movie King Arthur. It's quite an interesting movie in many ways. And when Arthur, who could be the hero, takes the sword, He's so overcome by visions of his murderous uncle that he can't pick up the weapon. Well, think about that. Now, you have weapons at your disposal, but they've been used by your murderous uncle. How dare you wield them? And the answer is, maybe it's easy just to leave the sword on the ground because you do want to be responsible for atrocities going forward. And don't think you couldn't be. And don't think you might not enjoy it. And so, the way you pay for your privileges with your I mean that most particularly. You have yourself in this existential guilt. And the way you expiate that and atone is by doing your best to live the best possible life you can manage. To speak the truth, to treat people with
I already this
respect,
game up, bro. I want to cook some chicken
abide by the
wings.
principles of the dignity of the individual and to put your house in order. And that's how you pay for your unearned privilege. All of us. And we all have our privileges and our curses. You know? All of us have that. That's why it's not useful to be envious of people. You know, you're a young man, you see someone drive by in a Ferrari with a blonde, and you think, my God, he's got everything. And, you know, the woman in the car is a prostitute who's got a cocaine addiction, and her life is just one catastrophe after another. And he's had to lie and cheat his way into this position, and he's afraid that everything's going to come crashing down on him, and that's what you're jealous of. And it's just not that profound. You don't want someone else's fate. Man, your fate's enough, and your adventure's enough. It's plenty. It's more than you can ever fully realize. And so that's also part of the reason that we all believe that the individual has some intrinsic dignity. It's don't be so sure that your position and your room is so damn trivial. It might be your attitude towards it that's trivial. And if you're in dire straits and dire circumstances, just look at how much opportunity you have to make things better. So, not that it's easy. You don't even want it to be easy. So,
Do you defuse it? I can't.
On that point of you don't want it to be easy, I've really contended with this idea of struggle and chaos in my life and the role it plays. And once upon a time, I thought I was trying to
Chiquitos, fuck your big black BBC and fuck you, nigga.
Get rich and
I love
get
you.
Ferrari.